Hello, everyone, and we're here with another episode of Intentional Insights videocast. And we're talking with John Behar, who runs the Giving Games project. Now, Giving Games are workshops devoted to philanthropic education. Philanthropic education may sound a bit boring and dry, but it's anything but. I've run Giving Games myself, and I can attest that it's really a deep, powerful, emotional experience for people to participate in them and to think about what charity is the best. What will they vote for? What do they care about? It gets to the heart of how we give to charity and how we make the most positive impact in the world. So let me introduce John, or let John introduce himself to share a little bit more about himself and the Giving Game project. Please go ahead, John.
Hi, I'm John Behar. As Gleb said, I run the Giving Game project in my role as Director of Philanthropy Education at The Life You Can Save. Giving Games are a model that I developed about 4 years ago. So I'd learned about effective giving in a weird place at a hedge fund, actually, where I worked for about 10 years. And I learned about effective giving from some coworkers who went on to found the charity evaluator GiveWell. GiveWell was an incredible idea. Conduct research of a very high quality into which charities do the most good, and then make that public so other people can use that. So I was a very early supporter of GiveWell. I still think they do fantastic work. But one thing that I noticed in the course of advocating for GiveWell is how many people would grant the idea that GiveWell's research could identify the best giving opportunities, but would just simply say that that's not what they were interested in. They weren't trying to maximize impact. They had other priorities in their giving. And I always knew that was true to some extent, but the degree to which I kept hearing those responses really surprised me. So I think I've been interested in a long time in the question of, how do you get people to care about impact in their giving? So that question had been rattling around for a while, but it wasn't until I had a chance to sort of take some time off in my life before I actually did anything about it. So after about 10 years in the hedge fund industry, I was pretty burned out, found I was no longer passionate about the work the way I had been earlier, and really was just looking for a new direction in my life. So quit my job, moved to San Francisco, and just decided to take some time off and figure out the next step in life. And one of the things that allowed me to do was reflect on some of the questions that had been rattling around my head for a long time, like this issue of how to get people to give more effectively. And one night, about a year into my sabbatical, the idea for Giving Games just popped into my head. And the more I thought about it, the more excited I became about it as a way to both spread interest in effective giving, but also understand communication attempts to try to get people more interested in effectiveness are failing. Because when we run a giving game that offers a choice of charities with a stark difference in quality, if people choose the charity that's less impactful, it's really important to understand why people would choose those decisions in a very stylized decision, where they're choosing relative to a presumably more effective charity. And Giving Games let us understand how people make those decisions. Both at a micro level, we get to listen to people tell us what they think. And then at a macro level, we can sort of study Giving Games in aggregate, Giving Games with different audiences, Giving Games with different setups, different charity selections involved, and understand which of those types of designs tend to produce more good outcomes and which of them tend to produce less good outcomes.
Yeah, so it sounds like that's a kind of a very powerful method of figuring things out and just letting people face their decisions and letting them figure out what is actually important to them. And that's kind of something I ran into when I was doing a giving game a couple of weeks ago at my local Unitarian Universalist church, where there were a bunch of people kind of, gathered together in a room. And giving games involve people just talking about the metrics for charity, why they want to select a certain charity. We pre-selected certain charities, and they talk about those charities. Then they get to make a donation to any of those charities based on a vote, and the donation is sponsored by an outside party, usually the Life You Can Save where Java works. So it's a great setup to get people to not experience the pain of the financial giving and let them really freely express and think about their own values. So at the UU church where I was doing the giving game, something I ran into was that people found it really hard to make the choice because they really didn't think about comparing charities ever. There's research showing that only 3% of Americans compare the effectiveness of charities before they give. And that's not something that the folks who I did the giving game with ever did. They found it incredibly difficult to decide whether to give to Against Malaria Foundation, which saves a life for about $3,000, or to the National Science Education Center, which educates people about science and evolution. And they had real difficulty. They were asking me if they could split their donations, vote half for one, vote half for the other, but that's not how the giving game is structured. It really is hard, and it really gets at the emotional roots of what motivates people. So I want to ask you, John, what have you found through your experience of giving games motivates people when they don't have to actually pay the financial cost of charity? What moves them?
Well, I think, honestly, probably the biggest difference between a giving game and a normal giving decision that these folks might make isn't necessarily that we're putting up the money, but rather the structure involved in the decision. So we're providing people with high quality information, and as you suggested, we're asking people to think about charity in a relative term, not an absolute term. So there's a very natural inclination to hear about a charity. Their programs sound good. You think, oh, this charity is doing great work. Maybe I'll support it. But that's for donors who are trying to maximize their impact. The question that matters isn't whether a charity does good in an absolute sense, but rather a relative sense. Is there an organization that could do more good? And if so, why not give to them? And what giving games do is highlight that opportunity cost that comes with any donation that we make. And so, when we give to one organization, we're not giving to another, and that's tough. And it's an unfortunate fact that we all have to deal with. And the better we deal with it, the better givers that we're going to be. But you're absolutely right. It's difficult for people to think in that way. There's the reaction that you observe in a given game is actually pretty common. People find it very hard to choose, especially across cause areas. There's often times people will complain about, we have to, choose between apples and oranges, and that's true. But it's actually probably worse. It's you're choosing between apples and orangutans. Apples and oranges, if you're choosing between maybe like two different health interventions, that's hard enough. If you're choosing between, like you said, a health intervention in sub-Saharan Africa and science education in the U.S., it's a extremely different question. It's very tough to try to put them in common units. But that's the problems that donors face, and the difficulty of the problem doesn't mean that we shouldn't try to address it. And so, one of the things that we try to do in giving games is give people some of the skills and tools and frameworks that they can use to navigate these issues.
Excellent. And I think one of the most promising things about giving games is how they are an educational tool, how they help people learn about effective giving and how to make the most positive impact. I've actually while people see giving games as hard, and the giving game I ran at the UU church was quite hard for people. So many of them came up to me later afterward and said, thank you so much. I've never thought about giving in this way. I've never thought about comparing charities. I've never thought about the opportunity costs. These are just not things I've ever considered, and the giving game has enlightened me, they said, to these sorts of questions, which they've never asked. And it's such a joy to enlighten people to these sorts of questions and allow them to be educated, help them be educated about things that are so important in life. Because if we all make more effective giving choices, we can make a much more positive impact on the world, and that is the real joy. That is the real pleasure of giving, of making the most positive impact that we can. So I want to check with you, John, about how you envision the educational function, the educational component of giving games.
Right. So I can see there being largely two ways in which we educate people. With some people, I think our message really resonates, and they kind of get it, they buy in, they want to be a part of it. I think those are relatively rare, but very significant. And those people we want to steer into the effective giving and effective altruist communities. Connect them with local groups, give them resources that they can use to get more involved, and sort of encourage them on their way. For other people, and I think most of the people that we influence, we're not going to influence to that degree. We're going to change the way they think about giving, but they're not going to jump all the way to trying to maximize their impact. But what they can do is take away important ideas and frameworks that they can use to improve their future giving. So, some people might understand the importance of doing research, even if they are still always going to give in a cause that they're personally attached to. They might agree that they want to research and find out how to have the most impact in that cause. So, while they might not be totally cause neutral, which I think would help them get the most out of their gifts, they can still have significant improvements in the amount that they give. Similarly, I think that we can teach people quite a lot about different types of evidence, like random controlled trials that they can use to gauge whether a charity really is having an impact. And we can also teach people about resources they can use, like the Life You Can Save or GiveWell, to help guide their giving decisions.
Excellent. Yeah, and those resources are very helpful. The Life You Can Save, where you work, and GiveWell evaluate charities, and GiveWell ranks them in the topmost order, and the Life You Can Save kind of presents 17 charities as opportunities to donate for various global poverty related interventions. So I think what you discussed, you said that there were very rare cases when people, or relatively rare cases when people realized it and kind of got into the effective giving community and quickly kind of engaged with local groups around that, and others that didn't. I wonder if you can share, and others that were moved somewhat toward more effective giving. And I wonder if you can share a couple of stories so we can ground out these patterns of everyday people, or the feedback that you received from them in feedback forms. What actually happened? What are some stories of people that did both, if you happen to recollect people that did both?
Sure. One anecdote that I was thrilled to hear came from New Zealand, where a teacher ran a giving game with her class, and afterwards the students were so excited about the concepts that they had learned about that they actually asked their teacher to run a course on effective altruism, which she's now doing. So that type of example kind of points to how excited we can get some people, and also the ability to turn a one-time event into a more ingrained and institutionalized way of spreading the effective giving message. As far as I think the less dramatic changes that we cause, We see this in participant surveys and facilitator feedback that people are gaining appreciation for the need to do research, thinking about cost effectiveness in their giving in a way that they hadn't before, understanding some of the complexity of giving effectively. That's actually a piece of feedback that we get quite often. People seem to express that there's more to think about than they had originally realized, which is true. And we're glad that now they are thinking about it, and hope that we encourage them to do so.
That's excellent. Both of those examples, and like you said, most people will tend to just move somewhat toward more effective giving, and some people will be really excited and try to get their teacher to teach a class or join an effective giving group, and so an effective altruism group. Can you share a little bit more? I know a lot of local groups devoted to thinking about philanthropy hard have been doing giving games. Can you talk a little bit more about how giving games help support such groups?
Yes. So there are local effective altruism chapters and other groups that support effective giving all over the world. And many of these groups are looking to conduct outreach. So they've really embraced giving games as an outreach tool for a variety of reasons, I think. I think the most important is that it's really hard to talk about effective giving. People feel awkward about it. They don't want to come across as like really preachy. They find it hard to start a conversation. And that's natural. Like if someone comes up to you and says they want to talk about giving, you kind of put up your defense shields and assume that they're going to be asking you for money. Giving games really invert that whole dynamic. Instead of asking people for something of value, when you ask someone to participate in a giving game, you're actually offering something of value, a chance to give real money for free. So you get to do good, you get to feel good. It's in a novel environment, you're going to learn stuff, and it's all for free. So that makes it ask. And we hear that that feedback repeatedly from the groups whose giving games that we sponsor. And I think there's some really interesting evidence that just came out in a recent survey of the organizers of these groups, which found that more of these groups were using giving games than pretty much any, sort of more than other effective altruist organizations, more than topics like animal rights that a lot of effective altruists talk about frequently. And I think we've seen that breadth in giving games around the world because people are looking for this tool to talk with people, and they're looking for a way to make it easier to make the ask, and for ways to make it easier for people to say yes to that ask. And in fact, that survey also found that having funding available for giving games was like the number one thing that people said would make them very likely to conduct more outreach. And so we're really hoping to continue to provide that funding because, if someone's looking to conduct outreach and talk to more people about effective giving, the last thing we want to do is turn them away.
That totally makes sense. And I myself have supported the Giving Game Fund for the same reasons, that I am passionate about using giving games for outreach, and I want to give back to the Giving Game Fund, which helps promote giving games. And John, can you tell us where people can go to support giving games?
Yes, they can go to thelifeyoucansave.org/giving-games/support. It's also just under the Giving Games drop-down menu if you go to thelifeyoucansave.org. And there you'll find options for supporting either the operations of the Giving Game project, or also options to sponsor giving games, such that you can provide the money that other people ultimately give to charity.
Excellent. And I know myself, being a nonprofit or leader of Intentional Insights, I know how important it is to support operations costs, which is why I chose to do that. But I know most people would prefer to support the funding of Giving Games themselves because most of the money goes to effective charities. And can you speak a little bit more about that and give people the precise statistics on the money that goes to the most effective charities from money that they choose to invest solely into Giving Game support, so having them be run?
Yes, last year, over the last academic year, the Giving Game Fund sent 90% of the donations to one of the Life You Can Save's recommended charities. So, I think, we're probably going to be in that 80 to 90% range going forward. And this offers an enormous opportunity for leverage because one way people can give is to just give money directly to highly effective charities. By sponsoring Giving Games, you can still do that. Most of your money is still going to go to outstanding charities, but you have the opportunity to multiply your impact significantly by teaching people about better giving. And the economics of Giving Games are just really attractive because the amount of money that we provide for each people to give is tiny relative to the amount of future giving that we have the opportunity to influence. So typically we provide about $10, $15 per person in a Giving Game, whereas the average annual household giving in the US is about $3,000. So, when you think about the sort of future donation stream that we could influence from a typical Giving Game participant, we're talking about, maybe tens of thousands of dollars or more, for a $15 investment to try and influence that. So there's, I think that the economics, that basic trade-off is extremely attractive. It means that we really don't need to have an enormous influence on people's giving behavior in order to still have a significant influence in terms of providing donor leverage. I think another really important source of leverage that the donors get when they do support Giving Games is the assistance that provides to the effective giving groups I mentioned earlier. We support dozens of groups around the world. Giving Games are a core piece of their activities. And when you sponsor Giving Games, you're not just helping individual Giving Game participants learn about good giving. You're also helping strengthen these groups, helping them engage their membership and add new members, and just generally strengthen the effective giving community.
Yeah, I think that's a really, really powerful aspect. I mean, I saw it in my own Giving Game that I ran a couple of weeks ago that I mentioned. At the end of a Giving Game, I asked someone who voted to give money to give her share of the $10 to Against Malaria Foundation, which is an organization that's highly advocated, highly supported by both the Life You Can Save and GiveWell. And I asked her why she chose to give to Against Malaria Foundation, even though she never heard of Against Malaria Foundation previously, and she had strong positive associations with the other options that she heard of, which was the National Science Education Center and Planned Parenthood, and Give Directly was the other one. And so she said that in the course of the Giving Game, she became convinced that GiveWell was simply the best evaluator of charitable giving, that we should all use GiveWell and similar organizations like the Life You Can Save or animal charity evaluators if you care about animal rights. These are organizations that we should use to influence, to shape our giving. And this, I think, gets to the core of this kind of change. For investment, I think that game altogether had around 23 people, so maybe $230. This person clearly changed her mind. I think about 15 people signed up, of those 23 signed up to the email list for the Life You Can Save, indicating they had clear further interest in Giving Games. So I think Giving Games have strong potential to be really transformative for people's giving in the future. And I wanted to see what you think about the future of Giving Games. I know that the Life You Can Save is collaborating with our organization, Potential Insights, and some humanist groups and secular groups. We're also going out to the Unitarian Universalist denomination, where I just ran a giving game, as I mentioned. What do you see as the transformative impact of giving games going forward?
Well, I want to get giving games to the point where they're operating at real scale. And that's a really ambitious goal. But the way I think about real scale is, instead of reaching thousands of people a year, which we're doing now, I want to be reaching millions of people a year. And that's the level at which I think we can create really substantive cultural change in the way people give. Because as you've seen in your experience and many other giving game facilitators have reported, and participants have reported, we are changing the way people think about giving. And so the more we scale up, and the more scale we can reach, more people are going to get. The more time goes on, the more influence we'll be able to have. And I think we can continue to build on that success. What I'd really love to do is basically embed philanthropy education, whether giving games or some other form, in the institutions that are really kind of formative in people's lives. So, in the educational system, where we're already operating at many colleges and universities and high schools and middle schools around the world, we want to do it where people work. We want philanthropy education to be a part of that as well. And we're running giving games with various corporations and businesses to that extent. Where in the sort of organizations that people belong to, they express their values, like the humanist communities that you mentioned, or different religious communities. We run giving games there because that's a natural place for people to think about the good that they do and their actions and how they affect others. So we really see philanthropy education as having a natural fit within many of those places. And I view giving games as a model that's flexible enough and simple enough and frankly cheap enough that it can be done at mass scale.
I think that's a really powerful message, kind of envisioning that future where, giving games are held at workplaces, at education places, at faith-based venues by, like you said, reaching not tens, not thousands, but millions, of many millions. I think that would be so wonderful, and I think it would make such a powerful impact on people's lives to open their eyes, as so many people's eyes have already been opened to the importance of effective giving and focusing on the impact of their donations and feeling good about making the most positive impact on the world that they can through their donations, and giving joyously because they know that they are making the most positive impact that they can, not out of sense of obligation, but because they genuinely want to and know and are empowered to improve the world through this education. Knowledge is power, and having this knowledge gives the power to improve the world in the most positive way possible. So, John, I want to turn to you and ask you for any last thoughts, and also about giving games, and also to remind our viewers about where they can find more information about giving games.
Yeah, so I think as a last thought, I would like to return to the notion of scale, because that really is so critical to what we do. We've put a big priority on growth in the past, and we've been growing at a very fast rate and have a strong growth pipeline ahead of us. And the reason why we're thinking so much about growth is that we want to create the changes that you were just mentioning, not at the individual level, but at the cultural level. And to do that, you need to reach a whole lot of people. But we think that, again, we don't need to convince people to move all the way to the right of the effective giving spectrum. If we can start to get mass acceptance of some of the core underlying principles of the effective giving movement, that's where I think that some of the biggest benefits can be over the long term. Because if you have people, if you can build a consensus around the importance of doing research, the need for high quality information, you're going to create the demand for the next GiveWell, the next life you can save. Other donor intermediaries that are going to make it easier to give effectively, and they're going to channel donors' demand for high quality information, and hopefully change the incentive structure that that people face in the charitable sector. Because to my mind, it's really that incentive structure that's at the heart of why it's so hard to give effectively. Charities are not incentivized to report impact. They're incentivized to attract donations. As a result, there's this negative feedback loop where donors who want to find information and base their giving based on impact, they can't find it, so they're discouraged. We need to reverse that dynamic and create a positive feedback loop where charities are incentivized to actually achieve impact, measure it accurately, report it accurately, and then donors reward those highest performing nonprofits. And again, that's something that is going to require significant scale to do, but we see Giving Games as a potential way of reaching that scale, because we do think it's a model that can change a lot of minds and just introduce giving to people in a way that makes them think about it in a way that they never have before.
I really like that systemic thinking, and I think the systemic incentives are so important to target. I think the Giving Games are a wonderful way to target them because, like you said, it takes away the pain of monetary giving and creates a structure where people can sit and think about their giving. And I think it's a wonderful vision to see Giving Games be reaching millions and many millions of people. And you, viewers, can do your part. If you go to lifeyoucansave.org/givinggames, check out more about Giving Games, and consider supporting the Giving Games Fund. All right. Well, this has been another episode of the Intentional Insights videocast, talking about Giving Games with John Behar. Thank you very much for listening. Goodbye.